Good. Clicked the appropriate button for everybody. What shall we speak about first? Send in your comments. What would the guys on TikTok like us to talk about? And we will make an effort at that. Send in your comments. The first thing that I want to talk about is, firstly, at 7:30, we have a guest, which is going to be the longtime friend of the show and Brexit author of Capability Britain for a Country That Works, and also Brexit, the Road to Freedom. I'm talking about no less a man than Will Podmore. And Will's going to be our guest. He's been the guest on the show several times before. He's going to be on at 7:30. Now, before then, we're going to talk about various things, but we're also going to speak about our new Asylum and Refugee program. You know, we've been big here at A Force for Good saying that the United Kingdom has to leave. It has to leave the UN Refugee Convention, because that's what encourages all the small boats. And once all the small boats are here, it's what prevents us from getting them to go back again, to put it diplomatically. And so we're going to be looking at the program that we have created, which has been basically a year in the making. We really drilled down in the last fortnight, and we've produced a 6,500 word document which details the alternative to the UN Refugee Convention if we were to leave it, which is what we advocate. Now, I'm going to start, however, by just some homegrown stuff. We're going to be looking at a conference that John Swinney attended yesterday, also Anas Sarwar, grandly titled Scotland 2050. And this was a conference put together by a sort of, well, they're not politicians as such, but they're cross-party supporters. Basically a kind of think tank put this together, really probably just to elevate themselves in the public eye rather than any other particular reason. Anyway, they got John Swinney to speak at it at the Assembly Rooms in Edinburgh yesterday. And one of the things that he pointed out in his bletheration, he was allowed to give a long rambling speech. One of the things he pointed out was that he would like to think that in 2050, Scotland will be back in the European Union. And the way he phrased it was, he said that in 2050, we will have looked at our place in this world and decided that the greatest opportunity for us and the approach which provides the greatest security is the European Union. Now, how do we get there? And it won't surprise you to know that the path to getting there involved, of course, breaking up the United Kingdom, because there's nothing better, is there, than advocating a union of nations while breaking up your own nation of unions. Anyway, that's been the irony of the SNP for many, many years now. So that was really the big thing that came out of it. The other thing that came out of it was apparently all the Scottish people are concerned mainly with two things. One, the high cost of living, which is certainly correct, and two, climate change. Yes, we're all really desperately concerned about climate change. We all go about waking up in the morning not thinking about how do we pay the rent this week or how do we get enough money to buy the groceries, but we wake up worrying about climate change in the far reaches of the planet. Well, you know, world does John Swinney live in? Anyway, what he did was he gave that speech, and Kate Forbes also gave a speech. And here, that must be the Daily Mail. Desperate Swinney in one last roll of the dice to crush SNP rebellion. Now, what that paper is suggesting is that there's a lot of people in the SNP who are very much opposed to John Swinney because they see him as not the man to lead them over the next few years, as too much of a kind of doer person that doesn't exactly set the woods on fire. The problem, of course, with the SNP is they don't have anybody else other than that kind of person in their ranks. They do, however, have a fairly large coterie of young women that they are hoping to bring in to these sorts of leadership positions. And in fact, I noticed there that Kate Forbes says, "I know how to unsuccessfully juggle a 2-year-old and this job." And she's talking there about various abuse that some women get when they enter politics. Well, maybe, but I wouldn't feel too sorry for Kate Forbes because she is on a massive salary, an absolute massive salary. In fact, I looked at the salary levels for these guys recently because I noticed in a report last week that the SNP now has 23 cabinet secretaries, is what they call them. Well, cabinet secretaries and ministers. They've got 23 cabinet secretaries and ministers, and a cabinet secretary is more important than a minister, and a cabinet secretary gets more money than a minister. So let's just have a look at the salary scales actually here. An MSP, the first column is the annual salary of these people, and the second column is the total salary once you've added on their various roles. So an MSP gets a straightforward £74,500, which is incredible, really. An MSP with a dual mandate, now that's an MSP who also is a Westminster MP. If you're a Westminster MP, you get a much reduced MSP salary, just presumably to punish you. So you're only looking at 25,000 there. The First Minister is on 107,000, but when you add in his bonus for being the First Minister, it actually goes up to £182,000. Cabinet secretaries are on their MSP wage plus the special wage for a cabinet secretary, which is essentially their 56,000. So you're looking at a cabinet secretary getting £130,000 a year. And a minister's special addition to his salary is another 35,000, giving him 109,500. Presiding officer is on the same as a cabinet secretary. The deputy presiding officer, whoever that is, and that's an absolute sinecure, is on 109,000. And the Lord Advocate, if he or she were to be an MSP, would be on considerably more, as well as with the Solicitor General for Scotland, both of whom are allowed to be MSPs if they want, but neither of which are MSPs at the moment. So what's Kate Forbes' salary? It doesn't actually say what the Deputy First Minister's salary is, but Kate Forbes is both a Cabinet Secretary and the Deputy Minister, so we have to presume she gets her MSP wage, she gets her Cabinet Secretary wage, and she gets her ministerial wage, which I worked out would be £165,577, just coming in behind John Swinney there, who's leading the field at 182,000. So that works out at almost 14,000 a month, or well over 3,000 a week. So Kate Forbes doesn't need really to complain too much about being hard done by, because those figures are absolutely off the planet ridiculous for what these guys are doing, really. Just as well, they're not getting paid on results, because if they were getting paid on results, then I'm afraid they would be getting far, far fewer. Good stuff. Thanks for the comments coming in here on TikTok. We're also on YouTube. We're also on Twitter, and we're also on Facebook. And at 7:30, as I say, we've got our guest Will Podmore coming up, Brexit author and patriot, a great fellow. Hang around for that as well, folks, at 7:30. And one of Will's specialities is British industry, and that's in his book Capability Britain for a Country That Works. And Will emphasizes the importance of industry to the national economy. And that just made me remember an incident just a few days ago, actually, regarding our wonderful SNP administration. SNP accused of hypocrisy for blocking Welding School. The SNP government has been accused of hypocrisy after blocking a grant for a new £11 million welding centre on the Clyde because of a party ban on funding weapons. The cutting-edge facility, backed by Rolls-Royce, aims to support the construction and maintenance of Royal Navy submarines. But it emerged last week that the enterprise was in jeopardy after Scottish Enterprise, an economic development agency overseen by the Scottish government, withdrew a vital £2.5 million grant. The move provoked a backlash from defence industry leaders and politicians who said it threatened skilled job creation and undermined national security. And this is how the SNP get called out for being hypocritical, because at Holyrood yesterday, Richard Lochhead, the SNP's business minister, defended the decision, insisting that the Scottish government, quote, very much values the role of the defence sector in Scotland and the many jobs it sustains, close quote. Well, if those words were true, it's not likely that he would withdraw £2.5 million from a project which aims to teach young people how to weld. Dame Jackie Baillie, Scottish Labour's deputy leader, described the Scottish government's position as, quote, frankly incoherent. She pointed to the Scottish government-owned shipyard Ferguson Marine, which she claimed was doing subcontract work for BAE Systems on the Royal Navy's Type 26 frigate programme. And so this is what the SNP will do. They will speak out of one side of their mouth while doing the absolute opposite. And they will try to claim that, oh, we're for the Scottish defence industry, at the same time as they remove money from the Scottish defence industry. So how do they imagine then that if there were to be an independent Scotland, how do they imagine Scotland's going to defend itself if they're not going to put any money into the defence industry? And this money as well in the defence industry, it's teaching people to weld, but that's a skill which they'll have whether they're working within the defence industry or not. So it's actually a proper skill, really. What the skills may be applied to should really be irrelevant, one would have thought. And of course, the British Defence Secretary, John Healey, said he could, quote, hardly believe that they would do this, that they would remove this grant. And he said, the UK government will step in to provide the funding unless the SNP ministers refuse to consider the outrageous ban. Remember, these are SNP ministers who are on those massive salaries that we just looked at. An SNP minister will be on at least 109,000, probably 130,000 pounds. So this is what we are facing here in Scotland, is basically a so-called government that's totally incoherent on these sorts of matters. Rural Affairs Secretary Marie Gudgeon said, quote, "We don't support the use of public finance for the manufacture of munitions, and neither do we support that for nuclear weapons." Well, we know they've always been opposed to nuclear weapons, but are they saying they don't support funds for the Scottish defence industry? That is indeed what they appear to be saying. But they know that they don't have to bother anyway, because they know that at the end of the day, it's going to be the British taxpayer that's going to be paying for it all, whether the defence industry or any other element of the matter. And we also know what happens to that. Warning that the SNP will squander the extra cash. And this is actually good news as far as money coming into Scotland is concerned. This report's from the 12th of June, Daily Telegraph. Rachel Reeves announced yesterday that Scotland's block grant from Westminster will rise by an average of almost $3 billion per year to the largest settlement in real terms since devolution. SNP ministers will have an average of 51 billion of spending money per year between 2026 and 2029, with each year rising by more than inflation. And that's what we unionists call the union dividend. The fact that it really does benefit Scotland to be part of a United Kingdom. And indeed, our guest who's coming up at 7:30, Will Podmore, in his book Capability Britain, said, "To demand that Wales or Scotland or the North East all be treated as separate economic units would destroy the chances of success that a united country can achieve. We need to plan for the future, treating the whole of Britain as one economic union. This will enable the economies of scale and the interconnectedness that a successful economy needs. To succeed, this plan must give due weight to advancing the interests of all parts of the country." Absolutely well said, and always been a truth. And it's always been a truth that us unionists have tried to point people towards. Other truths that we'd like to point people towards is our new document, which we released yesterday. Let me just bring it up. Here we go. Now, we've long been advocates of the necessity to leave the UN Refugee Convention, which was set up in 1951. And we believe that if we did that, then that would open up a whole range of options which we presently don't have to deal with the huge numbers of people who are coming in essentially illegally although technically it's legal within the UN Refugee Convention, they are basically, to all intents and purposes, appearing to the rest of us as illegal. And so if we did that, we would need something to replace it. And so we've written this 6,500 word document, which is a 25-minute read, by the way. So this is for the hardcore. This is for the hardcore here. But let me just summarize it. Here we go. The goals of the program, the definitions, our 10 core principles, or rather our 10 core proposals, how we deal with those who arrive outside of what we are suggesting should be an asylum visa system, how to deal with those whose claims are indeed being considered, whether or not we should allow asylum appeals, our new status for people who are granted refugee status called contingent refugee leave to remain, and part 6 here, some considerations for the actual border force themselves. So we put this together in a very logical, very thoughtful way, and we say it ourselves, but we've never read anything like this anywhere before. Much that's been written before is looking at how does Britain deal with the refugee crisis within the boundaries of the UN Refugee Convention. And as we've pointed out, it's extremely difficult to get a handle on it, is so long as you remain within that convention, because that convention was never intended as a way to move economic migrants around the world. It was never intended as a way for people who are suffering some kind of misfortune to be able to claim asylum in other countries. It was really only ever intended, initially, it was only intended to try to sort out the chaos after World War II. And then in 1967, it was already out of date, but everybody had signed up to it and they kept it on the books, and they amended it to refer not just to the people who were suffering as a consequence of World War II, but essentially to amend it to every nation and every place in the world. That was called the 1967 Protocol. It was all unnecessary. It was all out of date, but we're still stuck with this in the age now of mass travel and communication and transportation. The UN Refugee Convention is simply a way that undermines the safety and security, and especially the sovereignty of our national borders, and indeed every nation's national borders. And it really is no longer fit for purpose. The thing is, though, it is a core law of the post-war legal structure. Every nation has signed up to it, and to overturn it, or rather just simply to leave it, would be a revolutionary act. And it's not something that, for example, Keir Starmer's government will be doing in the next 3 or 4 years, but it's definitely something that we need to start a conversation upon, because the UN Refugee Convention at the moment is being used for things which it was never intended to be used for. It's being used now as simply a backdoor way of getting people into the country outside of the proper legal channels. So we recognize all of that in this. We explain how the UN Refugee Convention works. We start with our definitions of what an asylum seeker is compared to what a refugee is. And we start with our core proposals, which firstly is leaving the UN Convention. And then when we've done that, people who enter the country illegally will be free to be disciplined, as it were, will be free to be put in prison if necessary. Because at the moment, if somebody enters illegally and claims refugee status, we do have to take them seriously. Whereas if we leave, we'll no longer be bound by that requirement. We'll be able to have an actual deterrent, which will be prison. At the moment, if we declare somebody's asylum claim nonsense and inadmissible, we still cannot send them back. without an investigation which proves otherwise. So that, again, is just simply a way that these people are able to stay in the country. So that has to end as well, and that will end when we leave the UN Refugee Convention. Now, a lot of people think it's the ECHR which prevents us deporting people. It's not actually. It's the UN Refugee Convention. As we say here, it is primarily the UN Refugee Convention which opens the door into the country in the first place, and it is the UN Refugee Convention which is the main reason we're prevented from deporting clearly fraudulent, inadmissible asylum seekers, as per the explanation which we've given in the above paragraphs. However, the ECHR does kick in for a far fewer number who don't want to leave and who can make a claim under family life. And that's usually because they've been in the country long enough to actually start a family life. And as we're saying here, if our proposals are brought in, most of these people will not actually be in the country long enough to start a family life. And so we'll probably largely solve that problem in itself just by our new proposals. And some people also say, oh, we need to abolish the Human Rights Act. We don't actually need to abolish that at all. We just need to do what we've suggested here in these articles. And here's our big one. We're going back to the asylum applications from 1984. And you notice in these years, between 84 and 88, there's an average there of around about, what did we say? 3,000, about around 2,000 applications in those years, 84 to 88. In 2024, there was 84,000. Okay, now the world was just as dangerous back in the 80s as it is today. The only thing that has changed, of course, is mass communication and ease of transport. And so we're saying let's get back and just simply allow that number of applications, which will give us around about 4,000 people altogether, 4,000 to 5,000 people a year. Perfectly feasible and handable. We'll be able to handle that number, but these kind of numbers just now, 84,000 primary applications. That doesn't include dependents. I mean, that's crazy, absolutely crazy figures. Maintain a safe country list. The asylum applications to be lodged and visas issued at the British Embassy or consulate in the country of origin. That's an important one as well. And tightening up just what is persecution. And originally, and still to this day, the actual written words of the UN Refugee Convention say that there has to be a direct risk to life or freedom. But that has been expanded now to simply be far wider, in a way that basically brings in anybody who's got a complaint about anything. And in parts number 9 and 10 here, we look at the UN and its own particular refugee and humanitarian schemes, and we advise against participation in them. They're not really relevant to us. So that's a big article there. I do suggest that you go to it. Just simply go to aforceforgood.uk, click on blog, and you get taken to it. It's a major read, but it covers all the bases, and it is a very good piece of work, and it could be simply adopted by any political party if they wanted to adopt that tomorrow. And I would encourage people to do that. That's out there. It's for free, and it's my my gift to you, as it were. Now, folks, I'm going to bring on our guest at the bottom of the hour. Sorry for being 3 minutes late for that. This is Will Podmore. Let me bring on Will.
Hello there. Hello there. Thanks very much, Alistair. that was absolutely fascinating. I've learnt an awful lot. I look forward very much to examining in detail your proposal, which sounds extremely sensible.
Good.
I do like your earlier suggestion about paying SNP politicians by their results. I think that would certainly reduce the burden on the Scottish taxpayer considerably. Not a bad idea at all. And
Absolutely. Maybe that's what we should do for all politicians.
Yes, maybe.
Yeah.
And early on, I'd just like to thank Alistair and all his team, all the team of all the Force for Good, who do such wonderful work on behalf of all the citizens of our beloved country. I think it's wonderful work they're doing, all of you, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much yourself, Will. You've been a great long-time friend of our organisation and a great supporter, and very, very grateful for all of that. Now, also an author as well, and we always like to plug your book, Capability Britain, for a country that works. What was the thinking behind writing this book?
Well, largely it was that there's so much talk about, decline and, everything's broken and we're all doomed, and, if the climate doesn't kill us, something else will. And I just thought, well, actually there's a lot of positives in the country that need to be emphasised and built on. We've still got an educated population, a skilled population. We've still got quite a lot of industry, not as much as we should have, but we've still got a lot of industry, quite often in the very important defence sector, which is the residue of many of the engineering skills that are so important across the wider economy. We've still got an apprenticeship scheme which brings young people into work and into skilled work, and that's very important, and it ought to be expanded hugely. That would help enormously to solve a lot of the problems we see, social problems with young men without education or employment. We need to get people into apprenticeships. That's very important to do useful work. There's so much work that needs doing and it isn't being done currently. And what we have at the moment with a Labour government, well, it doesn't. It's like Alistair was saying about talking out the side of their mouths. They quite often now, in particular, talk the talk. They'll talk about HS2. A brilliant project, but they've been chopping and chopping and chopping, delaying and delaying and delaying. So we won't get the full benefits of HS2, even by the date they're now postulating. What was it, 2035 or something? I mean, talk about delay. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yes.
And there's so many other aspects of industry where now they're talking about steel, and they've put a little bit of support towards Scunthorpe, but not enough to Port Talbot, not enough to steel making in Scotland either. But still, the Scunthorpe works. Who owns it? A Chinese company. They still own it. We don't own it. The people don't own it. Our state, our nation doesn't own it. It's this Chinese company, and the suspicion was that Chinese company was very happy to pull the plug on British steel. It's still called British steel, rather ironically, but they pulled the plug on British steel in order to benefit the Chinese steel industry. Well, surprise, surprise. But a country should look after its own national interests. I'm not knocking them for looking after their national interest, but I am very disappointed that the so-called Labour government isn't doing a similar thing of looking after the British national interest. Obviously not the English national interest, the British national interest. And that is so important. That's what needs to be done. It's ironic. Sorry?
I like the fact that your book definitely does emphasise the British angle, and you've always been very keen on the unity of the people of Great Britain, which is something that really appeals to us as well.
Yes, it's so important. I mean, referendum result, which is now so routinely decried, and always has been by certain people, led usually by the SNP, that referendum, more than 17 million people voted for an independent, united Britain, in effect. How many people voted for Keir Starmer's Labour government in the recent election? 9 million. 9 million compared to 17 million. How dare he try to reverse the democratic decision of 17 million, which was the biggest single vote for anything in British history? How dare this leader of a minority government, which had so little support across the country? It was a 60% turnout in that election, and in effect Labour got something like 20% of the votes. A fifth of the electorate supported the Labour Party. So it's 30% of the votes, but given such a low turnout, only a fifth of the population actually supported that government. So they have what mandate is that? It's not a very strong mandate, is it? And certainly not to reverse a hugely democratic decision.
No, unfortunately, the way things work in the UK is that once you get into power, then you can tend to do, what you want, or rather, what you can get.
What you can get away with.
That seems to be about it.
Yeah. I think quite often, recently, we've seen that the government can be pushed back on some issues. I mean, I don't think it would have supported the people who work at the Scunthorpe Steelworks if those people there hadn't actually kicked up quite a fuss. And I know other steel workers across the country did without so much success. But it's very important that people put pressure on a government and put forward their own plans for building and restoring and expanding the industrial structure of the country. Because a country that hasn't got the capacity to produce its own steel, for instance, is extremely dependent on everybody else, for steel, because you need steel for your computers, your rail, just about everything you think of that you need. Steel is a vital component, and we would be, if we lost steel, we'd be the only G7 country without the capacity to produce quality steel on our own account, and that would be really backward step.
After writing a big manual like this, do you have any theories as to why successive British governments have let that sort of thing go in such a way? Is it just ignorance or lack of care or conspiracy or...
I don't think they put the country first. I think there's, like you see with those SNP people with their grossly inflated salaries. Once you're sitting there in Holyrood, getting into your bank account that much money every month, you really don't probably care very passionately about anybody else. And I do think it's very worrying that those people are so well paid for doing so little. I mean, Holyrood was never a great success, was it? You all know far more about it than I do. You know it more intimately than I do, at least. But to me, it's been a waste of space ever since it started. And it has got no right to exist. But does that explain why politicians do what they do? I don't know.
I think it does to an extent, and they take the easy route. Like you take Holyrood, for example. Most of the people who are there are kind of they've been lucky. They've been able to be accepted by the Labour Party, the SNP. They've been put in areas where they're going to get in. They've got a really nice cushy number, and they're not, for no reasons against them as such, but they're not exactly great thinkers or even ideologues or passionate, really. They're just happy to get their £75,000 a year, and they'll just keep quiet. And it's the same in Westminster as well.
Yes.
And if you are an outspoken voice, you're going to get chucked out of your party because you're going to be too much of a problem. So you have to go along. So I think the party system is heavily to blame. I'm not saying that there's a solution to that. I can't imagine what it is, but there is very much like just that's ingrained in the institution.
Yeah. It makes it very hard for the members of those parties to prioritise anything except their survival and advancement within those parties. And that means obviously the national interest goes right down to the bottom of the pile of their concerns. And Starmer has been pretty rough. I mean, one thing he did turn the Labour Party from being a pretty shambolic organisation under Mr Corbyn into being a party which at least managed to win that general election. And he did it by kicking out a load of people who really were not any help to his party. But nonetheless, what did he do with that power that he's now got? That's what is alarming. I think it's very alarming indeed. That the fact that he's effective, it makes him more dangerous in many ways. And his ability to talk in response to what people are concerned about, but not do anything, is very concerning. I mean, like Alistair has produced this policy about refugees and asylum seekers. Well, in the old days, it was the case that still, whatever happened, states had the sovereignty, could say yes or no to accept or not accept whoever approached its borders. Originally, the whole idea of a refugee was that you were in danger in your own country and you were allowed to seek refuge in the first safe country you could reach. It's like sanctuary, like somebody being attacked by an anti-Jewish mob could seek sanctuary in the first church they could get into. But they weren't entitled to say, I don't like this church very much, I'll go to that church down the road because they provide far more benefits than our church here. So that's what's happening. Instead of, they're not staying in the first safe country they reach. For goodness sake, isn't France fairly safe? Isn't Italy safe? They reach Europe, and because of the open borders policy of the Schengen thing, they can then just wander across the whole of Europe and go to the place which offers the best benefits.
Yes, my studies have shown me that what's happened with that UN Refugee Convention is that that idea of the safe country, the first safe country, it's been expanded now, that it doesn't really have any effect. So you could try arguing that you're not allowed to go back, but the judges will look at case law and they'll say, oh no, we no longer really hold to that notion. It's like one of these ideas that it's an idealistic idea, but in practice the judges and the precedent, as it were, no longer really holds to that anymore. But it is ridiculous because France is obviously a safe country. But France isn't going to take them back, because the way that France looks at it is, well, they're only in France because they're trying to get to Britain. And until you stop them getting to Britain, they're always going to come to France. And so, like, Britain is the problem. And they're actually correct. We are the problem here. We are the people our government is the magnet that's bringing them in to France. And France don't really need to raise a finger, and arguably they shouldn't even bother when it's our fault that they're there in France. That's the way the French look at it, and that's the way they've looked at it since this began in 2017, 2018. I've got news reports in our detailed files here talking about the mayor of Calais saying it's Britain's fault and getting angry with Britain because of these people in their towns and vicinities. So it's our fault, and until we do something along the lines of what I'm suggesting in that document, then it's not going to get any better.
Indeed, yes. I've read a lot of what you've written on this subject, Alistair, and it's just absolutely diamond. It's absolutely first-rate stuff, and I'm sure this new document will be as excellent as all the rest, and it needs to be widely read and acted on. I think it's really important. A nation that can't control its borders is in some trouble. You see all these boats full of young men, although that was that Labour minister who said they were mostly women and children, didn't she? Well, she must be blind or something. I don't know. Sorry.
Yes, it was a bloke, but yeah.
It was absolutely nonsensical. I just saw a picture in a paper this morning of a boat with about 100 blokes on it. Didn't see many women or babies on it, and they were all of fighting age. Where they come from countries that have been wrecked by war, so quite often they're severely damaged people, PTSD, suffering from that, and they bring those problems into this country. And when you analyse the ethnic background of various kinds of criminals in this country, you will find all too many Albanians here running the drugs business, running the prostitution business. You've seen that you've got people of Pakistani heritage running grooming gangs. It's not as if we didn't have any before, but some certain ethnicities seem to run to particular kinds of crime, and we don't want to be importing that kind of problem. We really don't. It's not sensible at all.
That's right, because these are people coming from a violent culture, and that's just the way that it is. And they're not like the wee buddies that live in our wee Scottish villages. They're men from a seriously, often anyway, they've seen terrible things that hopefully none of us will ever see in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And so it is a threat to our safety as well. I have this phrase, the UN Refugee Convention, it's not fit for purpose, and it is an active threat to our national sovereignty, security, and the safety of the people. And as such, it needs to end. Yeah, this article here states, it says, most migrants are children, claims minister. But it says, Home Office data shows 84% of arrivals over the year to March 2025 were men, with 12.5% women, and the rest of undetermined gender at the time of the release. I don't know if that few percentage would be children or something like that. I don't know why they would. I don't know how they say that, but certainly 84% grown men.
Yeah. Yeah, quite.
But sometimes these politicians just bank on the listener not having a clue. And so they'll just say stupid stuff, knowing that these people are never going to check up. They're just going to listen to me, and so I can just say whatever I want, and I'll dominate this particular argument at this particular moment, and for them that's all that matters. It's not a good attitude.
Well, that was very much David Cameron's attitude during the EU referendum. I'm Mr. Lord Snooty, and I know it all, and you plebs better just do what I say, basically, because I can't negotiate very well. I know that, really, but it doesn't matter because I can get away with it. I'm still Prime Minister. I'll carry on being Prime Minister. After all, I'm Eton and Oxford, darling. So
yes,
it's like it's really.
And he did get away with it as well,
for a bit.
As did Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Some of these guys, they just always land on their feet.
Well, they
Totally.
do live in a different area of the world, shall we say, socially anyway.
Well, I'll tell you something. When they were at Oxford together, that group of the Bullingdon Club, I was at Reading University, 15 minutes, 20 minutes on the railway line from Reading, from Oxford. So they were my peers. They are my peers, essentially. And they went their way as a consequence of going to Oxford, and I went my way as a consequence of going to Reading University. So I don't know what that was. If I had ever met them, I don't know if I would have had very much in common with them at the time. That was for certain. Yeah.
Well, it shows us that you can't generalise about generations there.
That's true. That's true. Will, I just want to give a shout out once again to your book, Capability Britain for a country that works, and a lot of good stuff in there. People will get it from Amazon. This one, which was written quite, when was this one done?
2018.
Well, that was 2018, yeah. So that was just a couple of years after the Brexit referendum, the road to freedom. If you're interested in the Brexit and European Union debate and how it relates to the British nation and its economy, then this is definitely one again to look at. Again, you'll get that by just typing in Brexit, the road to freedom on Amazon.
Yes, I think a lot of us thought at the time, when we voted and got that historic victory, then that was it, right? Fine, we'll be okay. The debate's over, we've won it, we can sit back and, the politicians will do as they've been told. Not quite. Did they? No. I mean, Theresa May classically said Brexit means Brexit, and then she did everything she could to kind of like say Brexit means the EU again. And as Keir Starmer, of course, famously wanted a second referendum. If you don't get the right result from those damn people who insist on voting the wrong way that I told them not to vote, then you must ignore what they said and then try and override it whatever way you can. And there's Alistair Campbell still trying to do the same thing along with his other mates in the Labour Party.
That's
and
right.
Lib Dems, Lib anti-Dems we should call them.
Yeah. I think it was a genuine kind of people's revolution in the sense, or democratic revolution, that the elites were simply not wanting and not ready for and not prepared to accept. And to this day, many of them have still not swallowed the bitter pill and are still pining after the old days. And we've got to just be careful that that they don't get their way again. Always vigilant.
Well, as we say, the struggle isn't over there. Just like, in Scotland, I really think the separatists are on the back foot at the moment. They seem to be bitching against each other. They're two big, charismatic, so-called, leaders. One's dead and the other's disgraced, and they're left with very second-rate people, third-rate, fourth-rate, fifth-rate. John Swinney, sixth-rate. I don't know, but they're not impressive, and they're like rats in a sack now, aren't they? Fighting over the succession, after Hamza Yousaf's absolute failure.
Well, they can still bring the country down, regardless of how competent or incompetent they are, and it's something that's why we're always going to have a job here at A Force for Good, because that particular threat's never really going away, and it's our duty and indeed our pleasure to fight it. Well, it's coming close to the end here, so I just want to say thanks very much for coming on tonight. You've been able just to remind us that the EU matter is again something that's not going away, requires constant vigilance. And so thank you for all the work that you do and all the efforts. And I know you're writing articles on a regular basis, getting published in various places as well. So thanks for keeping the British end up, as they say.
Oh, thank you, and as I say, thanks to all the team at A Force for Good. You are wonderful. You're doing a wonderful job. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, it's our pleasure, Will. Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll have you back on again sometime.
Thank you. That'd be good.
Cheers.
Right.
Fantastic. Good to see Will there. A great author and a great supporter of our work as well. Now, folks, as you probably will remember from last week, we're running our crowdfunder, our British summertime crowdfunder. It's at crowdfunder.co.uk/summer 2025. And this is to see us through the next few months until the end of the year. And if you are minded to give something, please check out that link, and you can make a donation of your choice by simply putting in whatever figure you would like at the donate button. However, if you would like to claim a reward as well, then we've also got rewards for any kind of particular donation that you might make. And the top reward for anybody that gives £25, you'll get one of our AFFG Union Heart badges, which is otherwise worth £6. You'll get that sent to you for free. And we've also got other things going on there, including our wee book and our One Big Country book as well. These are available for a reward. I think it's £30. You can get both of these. And that package there is worth £15. So please do have a look at that. It's going to be running for another fortnight or thereabouts. Well, another 3 weeks actually from today. And we're not asking for a huge amount. We're certainly we're asking for a very, very small proportion of Kate Forbes' salary. In fact, what does it work out at? We're asking for 1.5% of Kate Forbes' annual salary. That's what we're asking for, which just makes you think what it must be like to be Kate Forbes, or her husband, who can simply retire now, I think. Anyway, enough of that, folks. Thank you very much for your comments. Derek says, great show. Thank you, Derek. Oksana says, thanks, Will. Chris says, thanks to A Force for Good and today's guest. As we say, huge thanks to Will Podmore for joining us this evening. We will be back next week. And we've got another guest next week. It's going to be Nick Mitchell, who's been on the show a couple of times before, and I've been happy to be on his show as well. He runs the We Say It podcast, and he'll be on the show next week, and we'll be talking about some activism that he and I and others are going to get up to in July. So until then, it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.